Recovery always happens really principally in the community. You may get started in a treatment program in some cases, but the real work of recovery is in the community. And one of the key communities for all of us is the workplace.
Substance use disorder and addiction are major health issues in the United States. According to the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Administration, or SAMHSA, 46.3 million people over the age of 12 had substance use disorder, or SUD, in 2021. This included 29.5 million people who had alcohol use disorder and 24 million people who had drug use disorder. For those struggling with SUD, having the right treatment, resources, and support in place are essential to overcome this health condition and seek recovery. Many employers have started to adopt recovery-ready initiatives to help their employees who struggle with SUD seek recovery. It's come through benefits, providing the leave necessary to seek treatment, and more. The Office of National Drug Control Policy, or ONDCP, in the Executive Office of the President, has been taking some important steps to create its first interagency developed toolkit to help organizations embrace recovery-ready workplace programs and initiatives. It's coming out soon, and it'll be a big moment for companies to support people with SUD and those seeking recovery. Today, ONDCP Senior Policy Analyst Peter Gaumond is here to share with us the important work behind the toolkit, to give us a sneak peek into how companies can use it and why organizations should do their part to adopt recovery-ready initiatives. Peter, it's wonderful to have you on Empathy Affect. Thank you for joining us to talk about recovery-ready workplaces.
Well, thanks for having me, Melissa. It's really a pleasure to join you today.
Yeah. So we have a lot to talk about today. I think a good place for us to start with this conversation is to break down what a recovery-ready workplace is for those who don't know. So would you mind giving us a little definition?
Yeah, I think the simplest way to put it is that a recovery-ready workplace is one that recognizes that substance use disorder is a health condition. And it's an extremely common one. Untreated substance use disorder is really costly to employers. In 2021, for example, almost 27 million American adults who had a substance use disorder were employed. And of those, about 78% worked full-time. So substance use disorder in the workplace is extremely common. It's, if an employer says we don't have that problem, the issue is they don't see it, not that they don't have it. It's been estimated to cost employers from about $2,700 to close to $14,000 per affected worker, depending upon the industry. On the flip side, for every employee that you help get in recovery, research has suggested you can save, say, $1,200 to $8,500 per employee annually.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a lot. A recent data analysis by the Flight Attendant Drug and Alcohol Program, which is operated through the Association of Flight Attendants, found that on average, airlines would save approximately $780 per participant for flight attendants that participated in the drug and alcohol program. So the savings are enormous. The key is addressing substance use effectively. If you want to avoid the costs, the unnecessary turnover, the lost productivity, potentially the liability exposures, you need to be addressing it as a health condition. And we can talk a little bit more about that, as we go on.
Yeah, definitely. And thanks for breaking that down. Now, one thing that your organization or your office, ONDCP, is doing is gearing up to release a recovery-ready workplace toolkit.
Mm-hmm.
So can you walk us through how ONDCP and its partner agencies came around to developing the toolkit? What was your process like? Can you share that with us?
Oh, sure. The whole process was initiated because this was identified as a priority in President Biden's national drug control strategy, which called for us to promote the adoption of recovery-ready workplace policies. The strategy didn't actually say develop a toolkit It didn't say develop an online resource, which we did, the Recovery-Ready Workplace Resource Hub, which was launched last year. Rather, we got together as a group and started discussing how can we advance this priority. And that's where we came up with the idea of creating a comprehensive resource online for any employer, public, private, for states that want to, or local governments or other entities that want to start state or local recovery-friendly workplace or recovery-ready workplace initiatives. And so we said a toolkit is really needed. And to do that, we reached out to all the different agencies that had relevant expertise and asked them to contribute. And in doing so, we ended up initially with a huge toolkit. And so then our task was, how do we whittle it down to make it as useful as possible? And that's the process we used. I think we have right now what will probably be the most comprehensive toolkit available, and yet I think it's still going to be very usable. So I'm looking forward to the release in the near future.
I understand that the toolkit has 4 pillars that roughly guide it: prevention and risk reduction, training and education, hiring and employment, and treatment and recovery support. So, what are some of the ways in which organizations can work toward these pillars? Can you provide examples maybe through the policies or benefits and culture that they can adopt?
Oh, yeah. Those 4 pillars, we developed those as a framework to allow employers or other entities to kind of look at this and segment the work in a way that's meaningful. There's always going to be a little bit of overlap between these pillars, but we think that we recommend that employers start with an assessment. By assessing your work in each of these pillars, you can start to see where your strengths are in terms of how well you're aligned with recovery-ready workplace policies and where you have work to do. And I think that's the first tier of effort. The second tier of effort is to say, okay, what can we take action on now most immediately? What will be the most impactful actions we can take? And what is going to take longer? So how do we stage our work? And how do we prioritize our activities? So we recommend that employers start with such an assessment. A company might find, for example, that it's pretty strong in the prevention and risk reduction area. And by that, we mean activities to reduce the risk of injury, undue stress, toxic environments, or other factors that might increase the likelihood of substance misuse in the workplace or in the workforce. But they may find that they're weaker in another area. For example, their employees may have little awareness or understanding of their benefits or their policies. They may fear that they will have severe consequences if they reach out for help, or the policies may be such that they would. So those are things that they need to address. When individuals know that they can reach out for help and they will get the support they need and have the support they need from their workplace and from their employer, they're going to reach out for help. They're much more likely to. When they don't, they hide it. So I think that's one of the key principles we look at here. Training and education is essential because employees, most of us get a company benefits and policies book that's the size of a telephone book. The first day we arrive at the office, we kind of glance at it and glaze over. If your employer doesn't continually communicate and remind people what those policies are, there's always going to be ambiguity. There's always going to be confusion. If they don't train staff and to build substance use literacy, substance use and recovery literacy, there's going to be stigma. There's going to be fear. People need to understand this is a health condition like any other condition, and it needs to be addressed as one, not as a disciplinary condition. So these are the things that need to be communicated. Supervisors need to be trained to speak to their staff, to their teams about this, and individually, they need to be trained to identify potential signs of substance use disorder or impairment and how to help people address those things. All of this is key to creating this infrastructure. When we look at hiring and employment, we're talking about hiring people in recovery, especially in times of tight employment markets right now. I think there's a potentially great untapped labor market for employers of people that would be highly motivated, highly dedicated, people who are in recovery. Employers, if they're in the position to do so, can even hire people who may test positive initially or have an issue if they have the means to get them into the services they need, and they can provide a conditional or provisional offer of employment and make sure the individual is able to address the issues that they have and successfully join the workplace. Treatment and recovery support. Obviously, by that, we're talking about your benefits, your health insurance, but we're also talking about what resources are there for your employees when they're back in the workplace.
Right.
Are there employee resource groups? Are there meetings on site? Are there, employee resource or affiliation groups where, say, employees in recovery and their allies can get together and create a community to support each other, to educate the broader workforce? These are all resources. Employers, some have Homeland Security, for example, has special agents that are also peer specialists for other agents. So employers can have employees serve as volunteer peers, or they can have dedicated peers in the workplace, or they can work with an organization to provide that support. But these are the kinds of things that we need to focus on. Addiction is a chronic condition. And so if you respond to it like other chronic conditions, you need to put in place the supports over the long term. You need to look at whether you can do reasonable accommodations, perhaps scheduling flexibility for treatment. And if you can put these supports in place, work is critical. Recovery always happens really principally in the community. You may get started in a treatment program in some cases, although many people find recovery without treatment per se too. It depends upon the individual. But the real work of recovery is in the community, and one of the key communities for all of us is the workplace. In addition, it's where most of us get our insurance, and therefore it's a critical mechanism for us getting the services and supports we need. So we see it as a win-win. We say it makes good business sense because an employer is going to improve their bottom line. They're going to build a stronger, more resilient culture organizationally. They're going to be doing good on top of that. You're playing an important role in the community, and you're helping address a critical issue faced by that community, which is substance use disorder, overdose, and all the problems that go along with it.
Thank you for breaking down some of those tactics. I'm wondering, can you share any other successful instances of programs around workplace recovery and the kind of impact they've made for people in recovery?
So there's a lot of good organizations that are doing work along those lines. One of the things that we're looking at nationally is state initiatives. And the reason we're doing that is we have this way of monitoring our progress in implementing a national drug control strategy. It's called the Performance Reporting System. And we need to find something that we can measure reliably as a measure of progress. And we know that state-led initiatives are exceptionally powerful in that they can provide consultation, they can certify, so you know that companies that were certified by them are meeting certain criteria, and we can reliably count them. So that's one of our primary focuses. So, for example, the state of New Hampshire has really been a champion in this area. They're one of the first to work in this arena, and beyond that, they've gone above and beyond to help other states develop their capacity to do this. They're hosting a community of practice right now with representatives from 25 to 30 states, as I recall, and even one Canadian province, I believe. And they've allowed other states to adopt their model lock, stock, and barrel, up to and including their branding, which is really huge. So this shows a commitment to creating this positive change, not simply to being territorial about it. Other states that are doing good work include Indiana, which has the Workforce Recovery Initiative, and Kentucky, which has the Kentucky Transformational Employment Program. As far as the New Hampshire Recovery Friendly Workplace Program, Nevada and Rhode Island have fully adopted their model, their branding, the whole approach. And I suspect there will probably be other states that do so as well. So this is what we're looking at primarily, but we also want to look at how do we work with multinational corporations, large national corporations that have a footprint in more than one state. So that's another area that we're beginning to look at. And the other thing we're doing is we're saying, how do we do this in the federal government? Because we sure as heck shouldn't be saying everybody should do this, do as we say, not as we do.
Right.
And so we've begun efforts there. I think there's some amazing stuff already happening in the federal government. The Department of State has an amazing peer support program that's going on. As I mentioned, there's the peer specialist program in Homeland Security. And I recently learned that the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration a recovery employee resource group was launched for people in recovery and allies. So we're really starting to see this movement, and we're beginning systematic efforts to say, where do we have discretion under the many laws and rules that govern our operations to move the ball forward in this arena? So that's the process we're starting at the federal level as well.
I think one thing that's really important that I would love to talk about is that you and many others who are addressing substance use disorder and recovery programs across the government are in fact in recovery. So I think that's just a good instance of showing how people leading the charge around recovery are themselves in recovery. Would you mind sharing a little bit about your recovery journey and how environments such as the workplace have been helpful in your journey in long-term recovery?
Oh, sure, Melissa. It is true that a lot of those leading recovery change, both in the government and outside the government as part of the organized recovery community, are in recovery themselves. I think that brings a unique perspective, a unique passion. I think it also can give you some legitimacy as a messenger by saying, I've been there, I understand the terrain. In my personal case, one of the things I always said is I've been everything from a patient to a counselor to a treatment program director to a state program administrator to a person who develops policy, state level and then nationally. So having that breadth of experience, I think, makes it possible for you to have insights into what will or will not work in ways that, may not be so apparent to people that haven't had all those different experiences. In terms of advocacy and efforts to drive change from within the government, it's really about empowerment and inclusion. That's what it's all about. While there's emerging evidence that the stigma surrounding substance use disorder is less than it once was, I think the recent Force March workforce survey really bears that out. It's still a powerful force. And so it's really important that people in recovery stand up and speak out, including when they're in official roles. That's one reason that I do that. Whenever I speak, I'm speaking on behalf of the office, but I can also speak as a person in recovery. And by tying those two together, I think it sends the message that we're all part of the same community, that the person in recovery can be your employee, your employer, your daughter, your son, your parent, the police officer, the elected official, everybody, because substance use disorder affects all walks of life, and people in recovery are in all walks of life. In terms of my own story, I was in recovery for about 20 years before I first spoke out. And that happened when I was working as a contractor supporting a SAMHSA project called Partners for Recovery. And its goal was to mobilize the recovery community, to raise awareness of recovery, to help reduce stigma. And obviously critical to it were people speaking out in recovery. And while I had always admired people who spoke out, I never did. And I had a lot of good reasons. Part of it was, well, that's my private matter, which is true. Part of it was at one point it could have implications for insurance. I think part of it was I didn't want people to think that, my only qualification for doing the work I'm doing is that I'm in recovery. That's like, well, are you qualified to be a cardiologist because you had a heart attack? Not necessarily. And so these are the kinds of things that were really, in my mind at that time. And finally, I said, I can no longer in good conscience do this work and not speak out myself. And what I found when I started speaking out was eye-opening to me. It was kind of an epiphany, because what I realized was the true reason I wasn't speaking was that I still had internalized that stigma. I still had that shame, even though I had long realized that this is a health condition. It emerges from the interplay of genetic and environmental factors. It's very highly common. It's not anybody's fault that they have it. Despite all that rational knowledge, emotionally, I had still, or psychologically, I'd still internalized that stigma. And then it dawned on me, in my recovery, I've been kind of doing the same thing I did there in my active addiction to alcohol. At that time, I would say drink before an event, drink during the event, of course, drink after the event, drink alone, and always try and create these compartments of normalcy and try and manage my life around that. Of course, eventually the alcohol use just spilled over into everything.
Mm-hmm.
Then I found that I was kind of doing the same thing with my recovery, compartmentalizing it. And by that, I meant it was, here's my public life and everything else, and here's my recovery. And it's not like there was a problem per se with that, except that really I think I was compartmentalizing it in the same way out of this kind of shame. And to me, it was liberating to say, it might be beneficial if I speak up at time. I don't have to be Mr. Recovery, Mr. This, Mr. That. It's just, if it's helpful, if I can be of service, I can speak. And that was really liberating to me. For me, that was like a new step in my own recovery in terms of being more fully in my own skin and being more comfortable. Just a couple of weeks ago, I got to speak in Oklahoma City at the National Rally for Recovery. And I was doing a little groundwork beforehand to kind of get to know who the host would be and so forth. And I saw in the bio of Donna Woods, who founded an organization called OCARTA, or Oklahoma Citizen Advocates for Recovery and Transformation Association, quite the name. But she had a statement in her bio that really stuck. And I think that kind of sums it up. And that is, the task is not to become normal. The task is to take up your journey of recovery and to become who you're called to be. And that, I think, just really kind of sums it up for me. And for me, it's a privilege to be a person in recovery who is openly in recovery, but who is able to take on work that is meaningful, that can be of service to others. And for me, it's a passion.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing your story and for giving that kind of wisdom. I think that's really valuable, and it's not always easy to talk about it. So we've talked about recovery, your journey, the toolkit, and you've mentioned the benefits of adopting recovery-ready workplace policies and support. But if a company is wondering, is this worth really implementing the policies or benefits, what would you tell them to encourage them?
Oh, yeah. I mean, first of all, it's definitely worth it. As we say, it makes good business sense. It's not simply the right thing to do. It makes good business sense. On the other hand, you look at all these domains and employment, training, and it doesn't even mention developing a culture of a supportive culture, which we don't identify as a pillar as much as a product of doing this work. And it can say, well, how can we do all that? And we're barely staffed to do what we're doing. Well, you don't have to do it all at once. It's just take it one step at a time. And employers, that's why we recommend they start with an assessment, because then you can say, okay, where are we already fairly well aligned? Where are we not? And where are there areas where we could maybe take some action right now? And maybe you only take one action at the beginning. Maybe you take more. But it's about moving in that direction. It's a process of change. One of the things we say is it's not done. It's kind of like recovery or like any organizational change. You're going to implement something. You're going to make sure that you implemented it the way you wanted to. You're going to make sure it's having the desired impact, maybe measuring different outcomes. If you're a large organization, that may be easier because you can look at things like healthcare utilization. You can look at unplanned leave utilization, sick leave utilization. There's a lot of things that you can use to start gauging, is this having an impact? A smaller employer, it's going to just be a little more informal. Mm-hmm. But it's all about getting the process started. And additionally, if you're in a state that has a recovery-friendly or recovery-ready workplace initiative, or in a community that has one, say a county level one, for example, or a not-for-profit that's doing one, join it. Generally, they will be able to get you free consultation and technical assistance. They can help you probably achieve a certification. And even if you're not in one of those communities, you don't have to go it alone. For example, New Hampshire, which I talked about with their community of practice, you could reach out to New Hampshire and their community. You may find that you have an employer next door that's part of the community, or you may find that your state is just in the process of getting this started, or your local government is, or a not-for-profit, and you might be able to connect with them to help get the process going. So Call your local chamber of commerce. They may be involved. There's lots of different ways of going about it, and it doesn't have to be done alone.
Yeah, thank you for that encouragement. I hope that companies do walk away thinking positively about it. One thing that I've been hearing throughout this conversation is the role of community. And, the workplace is just one form of community, but there are other forms such as in high schools, colleges, recovery residences. There's more to address beyond the workplace. So what does ONDCP and its partners have coming next to help continue to spread the culture and support around recovery in different communities?
Oh, absolutely. The workplace is really important, but it's just one factor. Expanding peer recovery support services is one of the key priorities in the President's National Drug Control Strategy as well. And how is that happening? Well, right now, SAMHSA is continuing to award grants through its Recovery Community Services program and through its Building Communities of Recovery programs. And if anyone's interested in those programs, which help support peer-led organizations, we can provide a link to information on that as well. HUD is working to expand recovery housing through its recovery housing pilot, or was a pilot program. It's now just the recovery housing program, which is a good thing. Hopefully we can see that expand further. Not every state is currently eligible for that. There are certain criteria. In addition, HUD now allows for recovery housing to be part of the Housing and Homeless Service Continuum of Care. It's always been a little bit of a misfit with that framework, but now they're making recovery housing available to people they serve, which is really important. In the upcoming year, we're going to start discussions about potential funding mechanisms to help launch, expand, enhance, or sustain recovery support services in academic settings. At present, there's no designated federal funding source for, say, recovery high schools, collegiate recovery programs, and similar initiatives in academic settings for youth and young adults. So we're going to be talking with SAMHSA, the Department of Education, and the Administration of Children and Families about exploring mechanisms to do that, potentially with joint funding mechanisms and so forth. And so I'm cautiously optimistic that we may find mechanisms to do that, because right now it doesn't quite fit into any of our silos. And the problem is the structure of the silos. It's not that there's a lack of need for this kind of support. So that's going to be something we're focusing on as well. Also, we're looking at stigma. We're looking at the use of language and how it affects perceptions and judgments. And we want to make sure that across the federal government, that we use consistent, neutral, science-based language, person-first framings, so that we're on the same page. And whether we were talking law enforcement, interdiction, or treatment in the public health sector, we need to be on the same page. And it's going to take a while to move beyond this world where we still speak of addicts and alcoholics, whereas we never speak of diabetics and asthmatics. There's a double standard here that we still use, and we need to move beyond that. So that's another thing. And finally, we're focusing on recovery research. We know a lot about the pathology of addiction. We know a lot about different treatment approaches and their relative effectiveness. What we don't know as much about is the many pathways people take from addiction to recovery, and what might be some potential points to help engage them and help them achieve and sustain recovery. So these are things we're exploring, what recovery support services are most effective for whom. So there's a lot of work to be done. So we have kind of a broad recovery agenda that we're pursuing under the National Drug Control Strategy.
Yeah, sounds like you have a lot going on. I'm really excited to keep following your office as you continue to support people in all sorts of ways. And I think a really good note to end on here is, if someone listening right now to this episode is in recovery or is struggling with substance use disorder, what would you like to tell them?
Oh, well, if somebody's in recovery, I'd say you can make a difference. And yeah, you can do that by speaking out like a lot of people do. Maybe that's not the right role for you, but you can still advocate. You can still raise awareness. You can help support policies that make a difference. You know that you can make a difference if you're in many pathways. You know that you can help others find a pathway to recovery. But you could also just help create a world that's more welcoming to people in recovery. There are many things you can do. But if you're struggling with addiction right now, the first thing I'd say is, if you don't already know it, you are not alone. And it may seem like it. Help is available and recovery is possible. If you find recovery, there can be a future for you that you could never imagine. And I know it doesn't seem like that. It seems like there is no future when you're in the midst of this. I know from personal experience, don't give up. If you've already gone to treatment many times, if you've gone to meetings or other things and they haven't worked, don't give up. Try it again. Try something new. There are many pathways to recovery. Maybe you haven't found the pathway that works best for you. Don't put off taking action. Reach out now. And so if you don't know how to start, I'd say call the national hotline, the 988 hotline. There are people there who are experts who can help link you with the services and support you need, who could link you with people in your own community that you can connect with. Or you can go to 988lifeline.org and you can do online chat with people to get support. If you're looking for treatment, check findtreatment.gov. That has a listing of treatments, different types of treatments, where they're located. This includes treatment for people who don't have insurance and who can't afford care. So there's options for everybody there. You can also look at Find Support, which is a new site that SAMHSA launched, and they have a lot of resources for you, for family members, for your allies. So that can give you a broader range of options than you might find on findtreatment.gov. Right now, there's no central directory of recovery community organizations. They're a real key resource, recovery community organizations, recovery residences. But we can share for your listeners through the show notes links to some state level directories, as well as some information on recovery residences for your listeners as well.
Thank you so much, Peter. I'm definitely linked to all of those things in the show notes. Thank you for sharing your story and for working with so many different partners across the federal government to develop this toolkit. I'm sure it will make a really big impact once it comes out.
Well, thank you, Melissa. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak, to share a little bit about what I do, and to share the message that there's hope, that we can make a difference.
I know we broke down a lot of information today, but rest assured that we'll link to the Department of Labor Recovery-Ready Workplace Resource Hub in the show notes. That's where you'll be able to find the Recovery-Ready Workplace Toolkit when it goes live. I know that Peter also just mentioned 988, findtreatment.gov, and findsupport.gov. We'll link to those and a few other resources too. If you or someone you know is struggling with SUD, I hope this conversation helped you realize that there's lots of support from our federal leaders and many companies adopting recovery-ready initiatives. If you liked the episode, make sure to follow, subscribe, and share the show with your friends. I hope you'll join us next time. Thanks, y'all.
Empathy Effect is a product of Forrest Marsh. You can reach us at forrestmarshmedia@forrestmarsh.com with any feedback, questions, or inquiries. If you want to know more about today's guest, are interested in participating with Forrest Marsh, or becoming part of our community, check out our show notes for more information.